Hi. Before I start, there is one really big, important decision to make. Which fonts do you want to see my presentation in?
Comic Sans.
Everyone who wants Comic Sans, stick your hand up. Okay, everyone who doesn't want Comic Sans, stick your hand up.
There's something funny about Comic Sans.
Okay. I'm afraid the boring cop has it. I did try to make a monospaced version of Comic Sans especially for this. And it did work, but it turned out not to be actually very legible. So, okay. So, reload. Okay. So, this is sort of secrets of the standard library. None of these things are actually secrets, but basically this is predicated on the notion that, I've been programming in Ruby since, 2004, 2003, something like that. And there's stuff that I hadn't seen until months ago. Stuff that I hadn't seen until this week even. And so I'm assuming that some of you are as, or maybe slightly less ignorant as I am. And so some of this stuff will probably be new to you as well. So first thing that I think is quite useful in the Ruby standard library, and that not many people actually use, is forwardable. And what this does is it lets you expose another object's methods. So I'll give you an example, and this is a genuine example from an actual project. We've got an event, and I've used active record just as a demonstration so that you get sort of like a kind of gateway drug. Everyone knows active record, like Rails is sort of the gateway to Ruby. So we've got an event, and an event belongs to an opportunity. So it has many on opportunity, has many events. So suppose that we want to find out opportunity has an organisation. So we can ask opportunity for its organisation. That's fine. We're happy with that. We can ask event for its opportunity, and that gives us the belongs to, and that's fine as well. So if we want to find which organisation the event belongs to, we can do event.opportunity.organisation, but this makes baby Demeter cry, so we don't want to do that. So what you might be tempted to do is to write a little wrapper method that says def organisation, opportunity.organisation, and it simply calls the call up the chain and returns it. And then we can do event.organisation, and it works, and we're happy. But if this sounds like a common pattern, that's because it is, and it turns out that in the standard library, there's something that will do this for us. And that's called forwardable. So you require forwardable somewhere, and then you extend your class with forwardable. And I don't know if everyone knows the difference between include and extend, but essentially include gives you methods on the instance, and extend gives you methods on the class. So we get these things like def delegators, which is actually a class method. So what we can do now is we simply say that we want to ask opportunity for organisation, and just say opportunity organisation, and it just gets forwarded on, and we can then say event.organisation. Like that, slightly cleaner. But that's probably the most straightforward and boring use of forwardable, because you can also use def delegator, which lets you call the method something else. So in this case I've said that I want to know opportunity organisation on event, and I want that to be asked to opportunity as organisation. And this is actually quite flexible, because these symbols are just messages that get sent. So it means that it's sending to opportunity. So this could be anything else. It could be an at variable, instance variable, if you just do colon at opportunity. If there's an opportunity instance variable, it will call us on that. And as a demonstration, something you probably don't want to do, but just to prove how flexible forwardable is. If you've ever used an active record, you try to use alias. So you might, for example, have a name, you want a title, but actually, at the moment, title is the same as name, so why bother writing a method? You can do this, except you can't, because the method hasn't actually been defined yet, so active record. Because the way that active record works is it defines the methods after they've been called once. So you might try alias method instead, and that looks promising, but it's got a slightly longer error effect, still too much. So what you can do, and I don't suggest you do this, but you could, is you could actually use forwardable there, And because def delegated will delegate to anything, you could delegate to self, and then this will actually work. I don't know what happens if you try and delegate something to itself. So if you did name, I do not know what would happen. Someone could try to do like. So that's forwardable. The next rather interesting. Luke said to me earlier, "What's the trackpad like?" And I said it's fine, and now apparently it's acting up. Open is a really flexible method in Ruby. It's in the kernel, so it's everywhere. And the most basic use of it is to handle input and output. For example, on a file, and you probably all know this. You can just open a file for writing, put something to the file, there you go. No problem at all. But you can also, with OpenURI, which is in the standard library, you can make URIs, websites, FTP even, work like normal open. And again, it's exactly the same interface. And in this case, I just want to find out what kind of content is addressed. So I've just got exactly the same method, and I just pull read on it. I read a kilobyte of data, and it's exactly the same interface as a file. But you don't just have to do files. You can even open a program. And Ben showed us earlier how to do this with popen. But actually, Open will do this as well. You can open a file in a pipe, and for example here, one thing you might see if you use Git, that a lot of the commands produce their output in less, so you can scroll up and down. It's quite handy. But all your Ruby programs can do this as well. If you just open less and write the output, less with a pipe, and write the output to that. So if you run this, you'll get a scrolling up and down. We could actually do it even better though. If we look at whether standard out is a TTY, we can redefine the other standard out, and then all the output from our program is magically in less. So this probably deserves a bit of explanation. In Ruby, there's std out with capital, all capital letters, is what your program is actually connected to. Std out with the dollar is a global variable which is used by things like gets and used by things like puts, and there's an std in for gets. So what this does here is it checks what the actual output of the program is. If it's a TTY, which means it's like a terminal, and if it is, then it tells it to pipe all the output through less, and then at the end it closes. And if you don't close it, you get weird behaviour, so just remember to do that. But the nice thing about this is if I decide I want to pipe the output to another program, then it won't be a TTY, so it won't happen, so it'll just be regular standard output. So that's quite a nice pattern for command line tools you might write. But open sometimes not enough, so there's open 3 as well. Ben's already stolen my thunder on this, so I won't spend long except to say it lets you interact with other processes and connect to their input and output and error. So you could do this. You can actually evaluate something in PHP if you want to. So, next thing, array ASOC and RASOC. This is for associative arrays, which is where there's an array of arrays. Like that. So we've got an array, and each array has 3 entries in it. So sometimes you might just use this you might want to use a hash. And at least up until Ruby 1.8, hashes are not ordered. So if there's something you want to preserve the order of it, it's more useful to have a hash of hashes than to just have, an array of arrays than to just have a hash. At least if you don't want particularly fast access for large amounts of things. And this lets you do things like find the first entry that matches dog, and it looks at the one that has the first column saying dog, and it gives you the whole array. And RASOC is kind of the same thing backwards. In this, it looks at the second one, which is backwards because they're sort of assuming that there's actually an array of 2 items, and R would be the right-hand one. But actually, the array can be as long as you like. So this is probably something you'll use about 3 times in your life, if you're me. But it's quite handy when you need it. So something a bit more meaty. Array pack and unpack are a way of converting stuff to and from binary representations. This is really good for protocols. So if you're dealing with a binary protocol, or maybe if you're dealing with file formatting. So here's an actual example of how to read the atom header in a QuickTime MP4 file. The start of it is 8 bytes, so I read 8 bytes from my input, and then I unpack it. And this weird bit of NA4 at the end, it's rather like regular expressions. If you like regular expressions, you'll probably like pack and unpack. If you don't, you'll probably find it equally obscure. But capital N means read 4 bytes in big endian order and put it into a 32-bit integer. A means read ASCII text, and 4 means I want 4 bytes of ASCII text. So by doing this, it actually takes each of these commands. So N is one command, A4 is a command, and it splits them out as an array. So right here I've got the length of my atom and the name of my atom just with this simple line. So it makes things that would seem really complicated in dealing with binary protocols actually quite tolerable. But there are some shortcomings because it doesn't know about all the kinds of binary formats you might come across. So dealing with 64-bit variables is quite tricky. And some byte orderings are just not in there or are platform dependent. But generally it's quite handy, and you can use it as a basis for all these kinds of things. So that's unpack, which works on string. But if you turn it backwards, then you can take an array of the data that you want to make into a binary protocol. And so here I've got a length, and I've got the atom name, and I'm going to pack it back up with exactly the same specification strings I used before. And then I get a load of binary stuff at the bottom, which is actually quite handy. But one thing to watch out for is that because it is doing binary stuff and it is implemented in C, you can break your program entirely if you come up with something really stupid in the string. The other thing that pack and unpack can do that's quite nice is Unicode. It knows about UTF-8 code points. So you can take a string and unpack it, and the star there means any number of them. And it will find all the UTF-8, all the Unicode code points in that UTF-8 string and return them. And that's quite handy in itself. But what's really handy is that if you know a code point and you want to make a string from it, you don't have to type it into your program. You can just do pack U, and there you go, so a nice M dash without having to work out how to type it on your keyboard. So set this is one that Tom taught me when he started at Ruby, which was, I don't know, I guess about a year ago, and I've been through my entire Ruby career without ever seeing it. And this is probably one of the most useful things that I've found. It essentially deals with mathematical sets. So you can see if you've got a set of x, y, and z, another set with w and x, and you can do various kinds of operations. You can do intersections, unions, and so on. But that's kind of abstract. What's actually useful is where you want to do something like find all the occurrences of something. You only want it once. So, for example, I've got a list of animal names here, and I want to find all the vowel sequences in it. So I'm going to find A, and find OO, EE. I only want OA once, even though it's in goat and stoat. And weasel has EA and E. So I go through my list of words, and for each word, I find all the sequences of vowels, and then, because I've got a set, I just stick it into the set. And the set deals with working out whether it's seen it before. You don't have to worry about putting something in multiple times. It'll do all that for you. And at the end, you can find out what you put in your set, and it'll give you all the unique items. So that's very nice, but I'm sure Tom will appreciate the next slide more. Tom Stewart, this is. Which is why I've made it a bit more functional. And actually, you can merge the set, and I won't get into this in too much detail, but you can rather quickly using sets, you can find unique things. And it's rather like having a hash without the overhead of having to deal with a hash, as long as you don't know what the values are. But if you're finding unique things, it's really handy. So, no one likes soap, right? We all hate soap. And if you have to do soap, then you really want to do it without touching it as much as possible. And the good news is, you can, in most cases. Sorry, it's kind of too small. I'm not sure if I can. Yeah, it's small. Essentially, if you have a WSDL or Bristol or whatever the cool kids call it, you can simply ask it to make you a soap driver and then send a method to it. Most of the time that will work. Sometimes it won't, and then I'm afraid you're kind of out of luck. But if you have a reasonably well-behaved SOAP service, you can just do that and then forget about it. Which is nice.
Is that different to SOAP for R?
It's actually, well, this is in the standard library.
Yes,
and it's based on SOAP for R.
And it's awful. And you can't use it with IRB because it redefines a bunch of constants that IRB uses. So if you try and debug a program in IRB that uses SOAP for R, it just crashes.
Oh, that's useful then.
But it does work.
Yeah.
And you can get it to generate classes.
I'm not sure that's true though, because I debugged some stuff with IRB using this.
Maybe it's
in
187.
Yeah, they must have. Yes, that's possible.
But it's the internals are also a thing of chthonic wonder.
I was actually really impressed that this worked. Because I always thought SOAP was really hard. Turned out in this one case it worked for me. So my last one is PP, which is pretty brilliant. So for example, I've got a sort of overwrapped here, but I've got a hash of data, and you find often if you're doing something in IRB, particularly with active record objects, that you want to inspect them, but you just get a whole line of about all these like angle brackets and hashes and stuff, and you really can't work out what's going on. Yeah, something like that. It's actually, ironically, it's turned out quite nice here, just because it's wrapped exactly at the right point. But imagine that this is all not properly wrapped. Unlike this one, which looks exactly the same from the inside. So, you kind of have to take my word for that. But what PP does is it indents things nicely. It long arrays gets to put one on a line, hashes get their keys on a line. And it makes it a lot easier to pick out the data you're looking for. So that's it really. A brief tour through only a very small selection of things in the standard library, but some things that I found useful. And if you want to go and do your own digging, rubydoc.org is really useful. And there's core, which is the stuff that's in core Ruby, and StdLib, which is the stuff that you have to use require for. But it's all there out of the box in Ruby. That's it. Thank you. I will put this up somewhere later so you can actually look at what the code is rather than briefly sort of having a flash before your eyes. Any questions, comments, other complaints about things? So.
This isn't a question. I just wanted to say that in your first slides with the def delegator and def delegators, the best sort of unpleasant hack that I've used there is when sometimes it so happens that you want the delegation to be sort of dynamic based on the parameters. And because that first argument you give to def delegator actually just gets evaled, and it so happens it gets evaled in a context where you've got a local variable called args, you can say def delegator in quotes anything that mentions args. So you can call a method on the current object with splatted args, for example. So you can have a method on your class which says, well, depending on the content of the arguments to the method that's being delegated, choose a delegate. So rather than just doing a static delegation, you can do a sort of a dynamic delegation based on the contents of the parameters, which is quite cool.
So that's in this one here.
Yes.
That's just a string with anything in it.
Yeah, you mentioned that can be an instance variable, but it can also be something like call foo with splat args, and then if you define foo so that it chooses a target object, then it works.
It's impressive. I always thought it was just send, but no, that's eval. That's even more evil than I thought.
Active record swap delegate, which you can.
I realised there's stuff in active record as well, and actually you could
You can do a string with delegate and active record as well.
Oh, right. You could also in the case of active record just say it has one through, so it wasn't really a.
So in active record you could do a string with to check the presence of the association first, and then call the method. So you do opportunity @sound. Opportunity for organisation and that.
Oh, well, you put that in the string.
In the string, and capture checks for the.
Yeah. Maybe someone just needs to write a decent alias method for active record.
There is an alias in caption.
That's useful. That will save me lots of time. So we're learning things about active record as well. Anyone?
Your open slide with type less.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a great pattern, but I just want to beg people to please use $pager instead of less, in case I want to use more, most, BI.
Oh, I see.
Just
so
use that. It's a great pattern.
So use end pager or something instead. That's also, yeah.
If it's there, otherwise default to more.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just like using editor rather than later.
Your last slide had links to the docs for core and stuff.
Yes.
Is there a sensible, I mean, I don't know, it might already be installed as part of Ruby, or is there a sensible way of having that locally?
There is RI, which will give you information on that, but it's not nearly as easy to browse through as the stuff on the web.
So you can, all the RDoc is there on your system, so you can point a local Apache at it and get through that way. And you can do the same for gems as well, because gems, all our gems RDocs get stuck in a single directory.
Actually, I didn't think you even need Apache Fricks, it's just...
There's also a simple Sinatra app for browsing local RDocs for gems.
And also, if you go to railsapi.com, they've got a configurator where you can choose your version of Ruby, choose your version of Rails, choose which version of RSpec you're using, etc. Tick all the boxes, press a button, you download a big tarball of all of the HTML docs. So if you put that in something like Fluid, you can have a really nice local site-specific browser that's just got your Rails and Ruby and everything documentation, and it's got Ajax search and stuff. So
it's a bit better than the one that's...
Yeah, the Rails API.
Rails API
really nice.
Yeah.
And that is an RDoc. It's generated using an RDoc template, and so you can use it to generate. I've seen other people using that template to generate equally nice documentation files.
I just realised we haven't used the microphones to capture any of it. It's lost to posterity.
And as an addendum to what you were saying about the SOAP4R stuff, generating classes, that just doesn't work. Well, I mean, it might work for the simplest whistle you can find, but having tried it on a bunch of SOAP interfaces, it generally generates classes that
It generates un-Ruby-ish stuff, but it was a simple enough whistle I was using. It was the Yahoo reporting on your keywords API, and I know it works because you have to regenerate the classes every 3 months when Yahoo changed their API. So it does work, but it doesn't generate.
Yeah, but it work for a simple.
Yeah, that's the
API case.
That's the joy of SOAP, isn't it?
My top tip for using SOAP4R is to use it to generate a URL, and then catch that with either with something like Charles or some other kind of debugging HTTP proxy, and then you can just make posts to that URL, or possibly print it out on some paper and then use it to paper cut yourself to death. And then investigate using hand soap or one of the other soap versions.
So was that hand soap?
Yeah.
I read about another one called Savon as well.
Yeah,
I got
that sounds more classic.
Well, the WFL and the thought on fairly respectable ones. I think none of them really, not very nice.
I once saw this, it was several years ago now, and I was doing something the same, and I saw this great big diagram that had about 20 different implementations of SOAP clients and servers in a big matrix. And green meant that they interoperated perfectly, and red meant it didn't work at all. And there were a few splotches of green, and most of it was just red. It's as bad as Java's writing wants to run anyway, because of lots of paths. Anyway, yeah. Thank you very much.